tonight after the series. So as you can see on the screen, those are all of our fantastic sponsors, and two of our amazing sponsors, Altra and SolFit, are actually their CEOs, El Presidentes, and owners are presenting on a timely topic tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Golden Harper. Golden grew up in his family's running store and was an all-American cross-country runner and holds the world's best for a 12-year-old in the marathon at 2 hours, 45 minutes, and 34 seconds. That's incredible, holy fast. Golden studied exercise science at 2 universities where he was particularly focused on biomechanics, kinematics, and coaching. And during this time, he wrote several research articles on running-related injuries and running technique. With the knowledge of proper biomechanics and a passion for reducing running injuries, he developed the world's first cushioned zero-drop, foot-shaped running shoe after appeals to major shoe companies fell on deaf ears. Golden's running experience and commitment to helping people run better were the driving force in the creation of Altra. So welcome, Golden. You've got the floor to present your topic, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Rich. Hello, everyone. Humbled to be here. Very excited to present to you, and hopefully we can learn from each other. And excited to get your questions at the end. And so get those ready. There's no questions that are too hard or anything like that. So bring it on. I like to be stumped, or yeah. So. All right, I'm just gonna share my screen a little bit as soon as they enable that for us, and we'll show some pictures and I'll run you through. There we go. All right, let's see how this looks. Hopefully everybody can see that. All right, let me see if I can take it to full screen. All right. So I think Rich already disclosed my conflict of interest, so we're cool there. Already gave away my my first marathon at age 10. I thought I would humor you guys as it humors me to see this picture. So this is me just after turning 10 years old, crossing the finish line at my first marathon, 3 hours, 8 minutes, 5 seconds. And later ran 2:45, a world best at age 12, which still stands today, which is really cool. The only thing I cared about at the time was getting this 6 foot tall trophy that I never got. But now the records stay with me, so that's cool, and I don't have to move them when I move, which is great. I did go on to be a 2-time state cross-country champion and ran one of the top 10 fastest all-time cross-country 5K times in the history of the US. So, but more importantly for me than my running career, I set that aside because I was really passionate about trying to help people. Working in a shoe store, just constantly seeing people coming in with all kinds of problems, whether it was a chronic foot condition or an injury that they were dealing with. I became really passionate about that, and that kind of took my time away from the professional running career and kind of the Olympic dream I had as a kid. But this is a lot less selfish, and hopefully more fulfilling. So, all right, let me take this screen share down. So I think you guys are in the clinical world, and I was the guy working in the shoe store that what I see is really usually post-doctor a lot of times. So people have been to their doctor, they've been to their physical therapist, and they come into the shoe store and they tell you what worked and what didn't work. So it's really interesting. So I like to really balance real world application, things that I have seen working, things that work in real life with the research. And when we can find a marriage of those two things, I think we're onto something. And that's where I've tried to focus my time, and where I'll try to focus tonight is really a evidence-backed platform here for helping people avoid all kinds of pain, foot pathologies, and movement problems as well. So, and luckily we have Ryan following up here to dive deeper into the movement side of things as well, the gait analysis. So, So the thing from my world is, after working in the shoe store for almost 10 years, it dawned on me, like, why do people get new shoes? Like, why is it that people come to get new shoes? And it was almost always because something hurts or something is off, something is not quite right. And uh, as soon as I realized this, it really instilled in me this passion for being able to fix injuries and foot pathologies, because so many problems start at the foot level, um, or start with a muscle imbalance level at the hip side. And so, as I went off to do my university studies, I did all my research and papers on running technique, injuries, foot pathologies, etc. And I had a really interesting experience along the way. I ended up spending 2 years out in Hawaii. It was rough, but somebody had to keep the sand on the beaches. And while I was out there, I had the most interesting experience. I was a kid who was raised in the 80s and 90s with what I call shoe doctrine at the time, dogma. And basically, if you're overweight and you have flat feet and you wear terrible shoes, you're doomed, right? And I get out and I'm surrounded by all these Polynesian people, and as you know, a lot of them are giant humans. Uh, Most of them have flat feet. Most of them wear flip flops or no shoes or terrible shoes. And I was frankly horrified. And as I got to know him better, I of course wanted to offer my expertise and, like, hey, I can help you. Tell me about your foot pain. Don't your feet hurt? And I'd always get this response. It'd be like, no, bro. And I couldn't, okay, whatever. Tell me about your foot pain. I know you're a big guy. You got flat feet. You wear terrible shoes. If you wear shoes at all, your feet obviously hurt. No problem. My feet don't hurt. Okay, my feet don't hurt. Over and over. And this really was interesting. It kind of blew my mind at the time. And so started to research that side of things too. And that led me down a whole new path. And more or less, I went back to managing the shoe store after studying at these two universities and having this experience in Hawaii. Um, and I went back to managing the shoe store with a totally new perspective on feet and injuries, obviously. Like you guys as clinicians, shoe store employees don't actually get any formal training on footwear either. Um, and a lot of times I'll ask this question if I'm teaching a group of podiatrists. Often, did you get any formal training on footwear? And rarely does a hand go up outside of the training they got from shoe companies, which just seems backwards to me. And I fully acknowledge the irony of saying that as someone who started a shoe company. So, but more or less, at this point, I go back to managing the shoe store. I've got an entirely new perspective on feet and injuries. And I love shoe technology. I'm a huge fan of it all. There's all the cool shoe technologies of the 80s and 90s. You have air and gel and hydroflow, and my personal favorite, Saucony Grid ground reaction inertia device. Just all these cool technologies. But the research really revealed two problems for me. The first being that modern techie running shoes haven't made injury rates go down. In fact, injury rates have been climbing pretty consistently, since the 60s. So, and then the second one is something I developed a passion for as well, is that chronic foot pathologies are higher than ever and they're increasing. And so, as somebody who works in a shoe store selling shoes, loves shoe technology, and then to find out that all these technologies, haven't made things better, but actually things have been getting worse, and that chronic foot pathologies are worse than ever and continuing to increase, that's frustrating. That's a frustrating moment to have. And I'll still be the first to say that I think shoes are better in they're lighter weight, we have better materials, all that stuff. So what's going on? And for me, it was like, we've had 50 years of innovation and technology, and injuries still haven't gone down. What is going on? And you can kind of delve into the research on this, and it's pretty interesting. You even have these several research articles, research studies that have been done, showing that cheap shoes have fewer injuries than expensive running shoes. Why is that? The question for me: why haven't all the new shoe technologies that I love improved things? And this brings me really to my first point, which is about running technique. And it goes back to our shoe store, something that we had done for a long time that we found really successful. And it goes back to my father, who blew out his knee playing football. He had been drafted to play pro baseball, actually, was told he would never walk normal again or run again. And through a crazy bet to run a marathon, which went terribly for him, he became obsessed with trying to be good at something that he was terrible at. And long story short, 110 pounds lighter, and 7 years later, my father wins the St. George Marathon, runs 2 hours and 22 minutes. This is 1984. I would have been 2 years old at the time. And he credits that all to teaching himself how to run like a Kenyan. So he basically, he saw a group of Kenyans go by one day, and saw a group of Kenyans running, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, they float." We crashed on the road. I crashed on the road. No wonder my knee hurts. I have no cartilage in it. There's no meniscus here. He had an unhappy triad, and so no meniscus going on. Very little knee stability, obviously, and he's sitting there just grinding away every time he ran. And for him, teaching himself how to run like a Kenyan changed his life, and it has changed everything. And I grew up in that environment, having this beat into my head. We opened the shoe store when I was 9 years old, and immediately the thing we did different than other shoe stores is we taught people efficient, low impact movement technique, whether they were runners or walkers. We taught people how to walk the way that people naturally move. And we also ditched the treadmill and the pronation analysis piece, which is very different from what most shoe stores do. So, but we had a lot of success with this, and I think there's a pretty big link between overstriding and injuries, and I think that's important. And I'm going to pop this up on the screen for you guys to see here. Hopefully, there we go. Okay. So as you guys know, most athletes, most distance runners, particularly overstride, they land with the dorsiflex landing. And really the problem here is that the body's natural defense mechanism can't work. Your body's meant to use a 3-foot spring to absorb the impact. And that 3-foot spring, goes from your hip, uses that joint, the knee joint, the ankle joint, and the feet. And all of those things can move in unison and provide impact moderation better than any shoe ever could. So I think that's important to think about. So what I found along the way is when we really look into the data, shoes have changed the way we run. And I'm not going to spend too much time on shoes. If there's more questions, specific questions on shoes, we'll talk about that afterwards. But prior to the 1960s, we had basically no overstriding runners. Very few people overstriding when they run. And I challenge you to go back and watch old film of people running, or just old Hollywood films. Go watch Gone with the Wind. Watch people run. You won't see people running the way distance runners run today. You're not going to see this overstrided landing out in front of the body, this heavy, harsh heel strike that you see. And if you look at the data today, about 83% of runners overstride to some degree. So that's a pretty big change. And I think there's a pretty big connection with this fact that we're running way differently than humans have run all throughout human history, and the fact that despite shoes getting better technologically speaking and lighter, running injuries haven't gone down. I believe those things are heavily connected. So, and I think the solution here is actually just to teach people to protect their bodies. And I think the frustrating thing is that, at least for me as someone who worked at a shoe store, no one was getting lessons on how to move in a way that their body is supposed to or is meant to move. And the question I had for myself is, why do people run so different in shoes? What is it about shoes that cause people to run differently? And what I found through my research is when you really look at shoes, especially, this is 12, 13 years ago now, basically all shoes had midsoles that were twice as thick and twice as heavy in the heel than they were in the forefoot. So that means that when you're looking at the way a shoe works, as we watch people go through a gait cycle, a gait cycle without a shoe on, people stay fairly parallel to the ground with their foot and their landing. But as soon as we put a shoe on their foot, what typically happens is as the foot comes out in front of the body, because the shoe is heavier in the back half and it's thicker in the back half, the shoe heads down towards the ground, the foot dorsiflexes, and then the foot catches the ground about 2 to 3 inches out in front of the knee, more than it would if someone didn't have a shoe on. And so I think a lot of this, my theory at the time was just due to the fact that the shoes, all the cool technologies in the back half of the shoe. The shoes are much heavier in the back half. They're much thicker in the back half. And this causes a change in natural biomechanics. And, ironically, Harvard, quite soon after that, came out with research that showed that when people run in shoes, they actually hit the ground with about 3 to 5 times initial impact, or for those of you, versed on it, the impact quotient. But basically, the initial contact with the ground, people running in shoes are hitting the ground with 3 to 5 times more initial impact than people who are landing naturally underneath a bent knee, like they would if they didn't have a shoe on or are in a pair of, what I've called natural shoes. So. And since runners hit the ground with about 500 pounds of force, 3-ish times your body weight, I just don't think 1 inch of foam is ever going to be a match for 500 pounds of force, or even 1.5 inches of cool technology, whatever it happens to be. And if you question this, I challenge you to stand up right now and lock your knees, jump 1/2 inch in the air, and land squarely on your heels, and see how well your cool modern technological shoes do at absorbing impact. And obviously that doesn't work very well. It's no bueno. Yeah. And so now you want to jump. Now you can stand up and jump 20 times as high, jump 10 inches in the air, and just land however your body wants to land. Jumping in place, your body's naturally going to land underneath the bent knee the way it should. Your knees are going to bend, your ankle is going to flex, your hips are going to flex, and all of that stuff is going to work together to disperse the impact. I can jump off of this desk here, jump another 2 feet in the air, come crashing down from 5 feet in the air, and that big 3-foot spring is going to absorb impact perfectly. However, if I were to jump off my desk and land squarely on my heels in a dorsiflex position, the way most people run, you would carry me off in a stretcher. Obviously, we don't want that. So that's kind of where I was at. I'm going to share screen again here just to show you what we see with typical modern, running technique or form from most people. Let's see if I can get this to move here. There we go. All right. Hopefully, you all can see this. This is what we see. Again, about 83% of runners run this way. It's especially bad, I find, with smaller individuals, high school runners as well, because the shoe influences them much more at a small body weight than a shoe would for somebody that's a heavier body weight. But what you can see here is a few things. You can see her hips are back a little bit. You can see her big, low, slow arms driving slow steps as well. And you can see a direct connection with her elbow coming forward, driving her foot out in front of her body and causing this dorsiflex landing that is a very high impact landing. This video was given to me by a doctor in Atlanta, a podiatrist. He had tried everything and wanted to know if I had any suggestions. And to me, it was night and day. Obviously, she has shin splints. Everybody out there right now, just pull your toes up towards your face and feel how tight your shins get. And now remember, you hit the ground with 300 to 500 pounds of force. And it makes a lot of sense why her shins are hurting. And simple gait modification here. And we put a few things that I'm going to talk about here in a minute in a text message. We got her some shoes that were a little bit more natural, and a few weeks later, the shin pain was gone. So really cool. She actually came to a clinic I did last year, I think, in Atlanta, and I had her run for the group, and nobody would believe me that it was the same girl running. That's how incredible the transition was for her. So I think Ryan's going to touch on some of this stuff. These are just some of the things I look for that are really easy to see in a clinical setting. I just basically tell people, if you do it at a keyboard, you shouldn't be doing it running. And if their hips are sitting like they would be when they're sitting at a keyboard, obviously that's bad. We need to get them tall. The other thing that's really easy to see is the elbow coming forward of the hip if they're running slower than 5.5 minutes a mile, which is 99% of everybody you're going to see. If the elbow's coming forward of the hip, it's clearly pulling the foot out in front of the body. Crosstalk principle of biomechanics here. If the right elbow is coming forward of the hip, the left foot is going to land further out in front of the body. And that's probably the most egregious thing we see with most people. That also allows, crossing as well. And then the arms being big causes slow cadence, which again in the research we have a direct connection with cadence reducing basically all forces on the body. And all of this kind of adds up to the check mark landing. If you know what I'm talking about with a check mark, you can see her foot looks like a check mark as it's hitting the ground, her foot and leg, that kind of straight knee, toes up landing situation. So, for me, pretty passionate about proper running technique. I think this is really important. It's going to reduce forces on the joints, and this is like the only sport we don't focus on form with, which is really frustrating. Any other sport, you spend the majority of the time on technique and a little time on conditioning. Running as a sport, unfortunately, just the opposite. And not only can good technique make you faster, I also think it makes it a lot more fun to be out there. I've got to compare and contrast here. Kara Goucher, who many of you know, probably the most famous female runner of our time, also happens to be an ultra athlete. But she said she was coached like 300 times for this pose here. And I think that you shouldn't discount what an effect the media has both in watching people run on movies and on magazine covers on your patients. They're being taught by the media, even the running media, to run wrong. And that's very unfortunate. And so, you might just impress upon them, like anytime you see the elbow come forward of the hip, that picture was posed and it's garbage. We don't want to do that. Contrast that with this group of runners at the Carlsbad 5000. And you can see all these elite African runners, a lot of stuff in common. They run tall, they run upright, they've got their chest forward. The hips are not in the back seat. The hips are forward and engaged. None of these guys are going to land with a check mark landing. You can see the foot is going to land underneath the knee so that big 3-foot spring can bend and absorb impact. And most importantly, in my opinion, which helps all of this just happen easily, they all have chicken wings. You can see how nice and tight their arms are. They're compact. They're close to the body. They're not flailing all over the place. They're not big. There's as little arm movement as necessary. And you can see just how far back those elbows are. Contrast that with the girl we just saw running where her elbows were out in front of her body. Basically, again, keyboard position. You see these guys, the elbows are way back. And that elbows back drives the chest forward. So I'm going to come off of screen share here and just demonstrate kind of 4 tips to better running technique. So here we go. So the first is just get people proud posture into proud posture. And again, if you're doing it at a keyboard, you shouldn't be doing it while running. So all this stuff needs to be like this: chest forward, shoulders back, elbows back, arms back. Everything is back, this way except the chest, which is forward. And then you're going to teach people to run proud, run tall. So with run proud, run tall, we're trying to get hips, forward basically and engage, not sitting back like this. As soon as we tell people run tall, boom, it happens. As soon as we tell people run proud, the chest comes out in front and everything starts to work. So to me, it's almost that simple. We just tell people run proud, run tall, run proud, run tall, run proud, run tall. Compact arms is next. And basically we want to get people with their chicken wings, or what I call wrists to ribs. And essentially for most runners, especially the average runner running about 10 minutes a mile or so, the wrists stay next to the ribs. And so you're right here. There's only about 2 to 3 inches of arm movement when we watch elite African runners run at normal human speeds in warm-ups. This is what we see: very efficient movement. Only 2 to 3 inches of movement. It's right here. It's going to feel awkward for your patients at first. It is, in my opinion, the biggest key to making things work. They should get a little bit sore back on the triceps at first and shoulders. You're pumping back, not forward. When they want to speed up, just pop that elbow back. That's going to drive the chest forward. That's going to send your momentum the correct way. This is not sprinting technique. This is distance running technique. Everything is different. And in my opinion, the arms are key to everything. This will drive a quicker cadence. And again, what we see from the research is, if we can get people to take 10% faster steps, that means they are going to be 20%, have a 20% reduction on basically all forces on their joints. So that's a huge thing. And a lot of times people ask me, well, what can I do to improve my cadence? Well, you can get a cadence counter for one. A lot of times you have a watch. You can just do a simple, just time and count how many times your right foot hits the ground in 20 seconds. But for me, if the arms are compact and small, that's going to really help the cadence out a lot. And then we also have done research at Altra with just shoes. The bigger and thicker and heavier your shoe is, and the higher a heel it has on it, the slower it is going to make the cadence. So simply by having a more natural piece of footwear that's flexible, lower to the ground, or does not have an elevated heel, that's going to improve the cadence just by wearing the shoe. So something to think about there too. Somebody mentioned on the chat, Spotify has playlists. That's true. Spotify motion tracks. There's a few of them out there. Super cool. You can just kind of run to the beat, which is nice. 165. I did a bunch of research. Somebody says metronome as well. Yeah, I like that one. Especially just grab the one off your piano, set it to 165 if you're running 10 minutes a mile, and just carry it with you. But no, you get the idea though. You just run to the beat. So in my research, what I found, or on your phone, is that 165 is the ideal cadence that we see elite runners, non-injured runners. That's the cadence they're running at 10-minute pace. At 9-minute pace, they're running about 170 beats a minute. At 8-minute pace, 175 beats a minute. At 9-minute pace, 8-minute pace, 175, 7-minute pace, 180 beats a minute. So the 180 is probably the thing you've all heard. That is true, but that was done based on Olympians running Olympic level speeds. So cool research, doesn't necessarily apply to the general population as much. If your cadence is too fast, you'll be inefficient. So back to our 3 steps that really affect everything else. Run proud, run tall. You have your proud posture. You have your compact arms. Get your chicken wings or your wrists next to your ribs, wrists to ribs. And then just make your cadence about 10% faster than it is. And these are all really easy things to do with a patient. And that's going to result in a low impact landing, or what I call a bent knee landing, meaning the foot is landing underneath the bent knee. They don't have to think about where the foot strike is happening. You don't have to train their foot strike. We learned during the barefoot running boom that when we told people to change their foot strike or told them to land a certain way, that it caused bad things to happen, injuries, among other things. Foot strike is a result of your posture, your arms, and your cadence. Again, I'll say that again, your foot strike is a result of your posture, arms, and cadence, and to some degree your shoes as well. So I think that's really important stuff that people need to keep in mind. Really easy to teach. I can kind of do we can send out a 1-page recap, even just a paragraph of this stuff, if you guys are interested. Okay, moving on. So what I found again, at my store was really interesting. Here is just some high-speed video. Maybe. Come on. There we go. Can everybody see this all right? So same runner, same treadmill, same speed on the treadmill, no change. This is an experienced runner, 5 minutes apart. And this is just a shoe with a heavy elevated heel on it, pretty standard high cushion running shoe, versus a shoe without any of that. When we initially were doing this, we actually did this with Vibram 5 fingers. We were seeing how they worked as a tool to teach running technique. And what we found is 5 minutes apart, people look drastically different. Again, when you're a shoe selling person and the shoe on the left is the only kind of shoe you sell in your store, that's a really frustrating place to be. So I thought that was really interesting at the time, and that's kind of what led me to put shoes in a toaster oven and try to make shoes that had the how do I say it, the benefits of barefoot movement with the cushioning and technology of a modern running shoe. So toaster oven is where I started. And, in my opinion, if you kind of dig through the research, to me, shoes that align with the science, are not super difficult. Shoes should keep your feet in its natural position, meaning they should be shaped like your feet. They should be level from heel to toe. And shoes should not fight natural low impact walking and running technique. Again, they should be weight balanced front to back and level heel to forefoot. So that's kind of all I'm going to say about shoes, really, in from a running shoe standpoint. And again, everybody's different, as you guys know, as clinicians. Every patient is different, has different needs. This is by no means a by all end all, be all end all. It has to be that way. Just a ideal situation, and what I think that the research says, in my opinion. So. So this brings me to the second unique thing we had a lot of success with at our store is we would take anybody who had some sort of foot condition and we would skip open the laces on the shoe. Hopefully you guys can see this here. There's no laces in the front half of the shoe. And then we would sell them their shoe like a size and a half too big. And when my dad first started doing this, I thought he was crazy until all these people started coming back to the store, and then they started telling their friends. And then it got to the point you could show up to a local, road race, and about half of everybody had their shoes laced this way. Ton of success with plantar fascia issues, bunions, neuromas, hammer toes, and feet that fall asleep, stuff like that. So, okay. So just for a visual, when I say foot shaped, I just mean that, feet are shaped one way naturally, and the shoe, we would like that to be shaped the same way. When I say balance cushioning or level or natural platform, just meaning, you were born this way, you wake up this way every morning. This is OEM human, if you will. This is the position your body comes in. Try not to mess with that, basically. I don't think there's a whole lot of other, places where in medical where we take a part of the body and we deform it out of its natural position and we expect good things to happen. That generally is just not the way we go about treating things. So why should it be any different with footwear is really my question. So to really kind of simplify that, what I'm really trying to say is, most people are born with natural low impact running technique. Over a lifetime of media and being taught wrong and a lot of myths that are out there and wearing shoes with heavy elevated heels, people develop inefficient high impact running technique. We can train them, give them some pointers, get them in more natural footwear, and they're going to be restored to efficient natural running form. So, this is what my, how I started everything I do now. And, our name was originally Altra, which is to mend or fix that which is broken. And Altra because I was altering shoes, running ultra marathons, as well as my buddy Brian Beckstead. And, we saw ourselves as an alternative to traditional shoes. All right, well, bust off the share here. Okay. So we got, I got 10 minutes here before we do Q&A. And, basically these are the things that I've found through the research to be really relevant from a clinical standpoint. What I call the marketing versus science stuff. The marketing is everything we believe. Obviously, as you know, the scientists don't have the money to get their research out there. And if it doesn't make money, marketing doesn't seem to promote it too much. So my mission is to promote things that are maybe, dispel myths. So the first is how to use cushioning appropriately. If you think to yourself, if I say to you, cushioning will save your, what are all your patients going to say? Most likely knees or joints when they're talking about cushioning. Whether that's a cushioned surface, a cushioned shoe, you name it. What are we told cushioning is going to do for us? Where is it going to help? People think joints. But if you really delve into the research, the reality is that cushioning is good for protecting where it is, meaning boxing gloves protect hands really well. They protect at the point of impact. But most boxers, far and away, the number one site that boxers retire from injuring is their shoulders. So the cushioning protects at the point of impact. Impact doesn't magically disappear. It reverberates up the kinetic chain till it hits a weak link, which for most boxers is their shoulder. Same thing happens with shoes. The initial research of this was done by a Canadian, Ben O'Nig, and several subsequent studies and frankly, dozens of subsequent studies by others since. basically show that cushioning does not protect your joints. Studies have repeatedly shown that while cushioning protects at the point of impact, it actually magnifies forces at the joint level. So, cushioning is going to be great for taking pressure off the foot and lower leg area, and it adds comfort, which is helpful from a scientific standpoint as well. People are least injured in the shoes they're most comfortable in. So, my recommendation based on what I see in the science is we recommend more cushioning for those with foot and lower leg issues, but less cushioning for those with joint issues. Pretty much just the opposite of what the marketing has been telling us forever, which is really unfortunate. So, how does the body react to cushioning? You have a softer shoe or surface, the body's going to hit harder. If you have a firmer shoe or a firmer surface, the body is actually at the joint level going to hit softer, and it's going to use the foot and lower leg muscles and the whole posterior connect chain down there to soften the blow, basically. So it's going to put more stress down in that area. It's going to soften the blow everywhere else. Imagine running on sand on the beach. You hit pretty hard. You come off the sand onto the sidewalk. You're running barefoot, and boom, immediately your body goes to a softer landing without you even thinking about it. So, um, tons of research on this going back to like the 80s. 3 studies in a row by Robbins and Hanna. And after 3 studies, they were basically forced to retract what they had initially thought. And their concluding statement after their 3rd study was, footwear with greater cushioning provokes a sharp reduction in the body's shock moderating behavior, thus increasing impact forces. Basically what they're saying is more cushioned shoes increase impact forces. So again, kind of the opposite of what most people think. So a lot of people think, well, why not just throw shoes out? That might be a good option for people willing to put in the year or so of work to get there. I support that. We just have to remember that force has to go somewhere. So forces on the joints are transferred to the calf Achilles arch complex when people are running differently. So and that was played out in the barefoot running boom. We saw the highest incidence of foot and lower leg injuries we had in running, but we also saw the lowest incidence of joint injuries we've ever had. So basically, we pulled pressure off the joints and we put it down on the soft tissue of the foot and lower leg. The thing that I always like to remind people is if you do this right and you transition it properly, joints don't adjust over time. Muscles, soft tissue does adjust over time. And so to me, that tells me exactly what I want to be doing. So, and then also, the other thing is protection is speed. So very lightweight cushioned shoes have been proven in the literature to be faster than barefoot as well. So lots of reasons, but at the end of the day, I kind of boil it down to, to this. If somebody has a foot or lower leg issue, specifically, kind of ankle and lower, and it's an impact issue in that area, I'm going to go with more cushioning. Neuroma, bunion, Achilles issue, etc. If they're having a joint issue, I'm going to recommend running technique, something we're going to talk a little bit later about, and a less cushioned shoe, or if nothing else, a more natural shoe that's going to improve running technique. Okay, so if cushioning won't save your joints, what will? This is something I did some research on in college as well, and it's actually the surface you run on. And this is something a lot of people don't think about. The most injurious running surfaces are actually tracks and treadmills. We want to avoid. It's not that the track and treadmill are bad, but they're repetitive. They're also soft. So soft surfaces don't necessarily reduce injuries. We see, again, more injuries on cushioned tracks and cushioned treadmills than other surfaces. So we want to get people back doing what your body's meant to do, which is move and ambulate over uneven terrain. And that's really important. So we found that if we could get runners and walkers to do 1/3 of their mileage on uneven ground, cobblestones, grass, dirt, trails, whatever it happens to be, they were significantly less injured. Pretty similar to what we see with full-time trail runners. So 1/3 of the mileage was what we found in my collegiate research, which is pretty cool. Okay, so we've covered cushioning isn't what we think it is. Running surfaces probably aren't what we think they are. And next is, and again, just remember, most running injuries likely come from muscle imbalance caused by every step being the same, not from impact itself. We don't really actually have a lot of research saying impact causes injuries, but that repetitive impact of being the same is what I believe to be the problem. And then, of course, the next thing is the pronation side of things. And we're running low on time, so I'm going to kind of move through this pretty quick. But as we look at this, people think overpronators are the most injured runners, and that's not necessarily true. Again, when you delve into the literature, there's a lot of research that would conflict with that. In fact, 204 studies have been done in the last 25 years on pronation, and 201 out of those 204 show that pronation has little to no relation to injury whatsoever. And my favorite study is one Harvard just did a couple of years ago. They had Kenyan kids running to school barefoot. The kids that ran to school barefoot, only 8% of them were injured, and they all had low arches or flat feet. The kids that ran to school with shoes, 61% of them got injured during the course of the study, so about 8 times more injured. And they actually all had, on average, they had average to high arches. So, not only did low arch flat-foot kids have a lot less injuries, perhaps the shoes developed these arches that they didn't necessarily need or want for their particular genetics. So stability shoes don't change pronation, only the way it looks. And I guess the question is, why should they? If we look at the biggest study in the history of running injuries, it's being done in Calgary right now by Reed Ferber and his group there at the Running Injury Clinic. And they find that about only 15% of runners should wear a stability shoe. Contrast that with the fact that 50% of runners are sold a stability shoe when they go into a shoe store. So that's pretty big difference. But many of the 15% that were less injured while wearing stability shoes did not overpronate. So, just because you pronate doesn't mean you should wear a stability shoe. And it really comes down to comfort again. That study says that people are going to be least injured when they wear a shoe that just gets out of the way. Basically, let your body do whatever it wants to do. So to me, go have your patients try on a whole bunch of shoes and actually run on them. You should never judge a running shoe while walking on it, etc. It needs to be with with the activity they plan on doing. But the shoe that is most comfortable, feels most relaxed, free, not there, house slipper like, that is, according to the research, the shoe they're going to be least injured in. And I'll just put a plug in. Arch height and pronation are not that important for most people, but your foot strength is, and it's totally ignored. We've got to get people, paying attention to strengthening their feet. This slide here, just look at the bone gaps, basically, if you guys can see these. As soon as we elevate the heel, and if you're looking at B here, as soon as we elevate the heel and bend the big toe in just a little bit, these gaps open up in the bones on the medial side of the foot. This causes the arch to collapse. I call this the slide of when do you need to wear arch support? Anytime you put on a pair of modern shoes with an elevated heel and a tapered toe box, which is 98% of all shoes. So when do you not need arch support? Typically when you're in barefoot position, your body's very capable of providing arch support for itself, which is really cool. So I already mentioned this. All right, last thing, we're gonna wrap up with this. This is one of my favorite things I'm super passionate about, is just where do foot problems come from? What percentage of us report foot pain? Most recent data I've seen is 73% of us report foot pain in the modern world, or at least in the USA. That's a big difference from the 3% of people in the world, which is about 1 billion people, that don't wear modern footwear. They go barefoot or wear primitive sandals. And there's a big difference in the type of foot pain. Ours is mostly chronic. We have it months, years, etc. This 3% is usually I stubbed a toe, I got a fungus, or I dropped something heavy on my foot, right? Huge difference in the type of foot pain that people are experiencing. Now I'm starting to understand all these years later why this worked when we got the feet opened up and just loosened the shoe, basically. So I'm a huge believer and follower in Dr. William Rossi. And his key thing was that 98% of all shoes contain features that make it impossible for normal natural gait and foot function to occur. And you can just see the difference in the way shoes are built. How the shoe is kind of deformed or distorted or the foot is inside the shoe. It's not in its natural position. Here you can see this mannequin on the left. It's it's falling over with a 1.5-inch heel on. On the far right, you can see all the adjustments your body has to make to keep yourself upright so that doesn't happen. And of course, for me, as someone managing a shoe store, I'm like, oh no, foot problems are caused by the very shoes I sell. This is the worst. And I basically had to relearn a basic preschool lesson, which is that putting feet, which come, relatively square inside of shoes, which are relatively triangular, causes issues. So if any of you have done these like shape sorter toys with your kids, you know what I'm talking about. I got a 4-year-old right now. We're teaching her not to put the square shape in the triangle hole. And yet most of us put our square shaped feet, or naturally square shaped feet, in triangle shaped shoes all day long, and wonder why things hurt. And it starts at a young age. I mean, this is a natural, happy, healthy baby foot on one side. And then, the kind of shoes we build for kids, terrible. Natural feet and toes before wearing modern shoes on the left, feet and toes after wearing modern shoes on the right. Sometimes I get podiatrists like, that's not true. I never see those feet on the left. Exactly. When your feet look like this, generally speaking, you're not going to have foot problems. The more your feet look like the shoes you wear, the more you're going to spend time at the podiatrist's office. It's just like Chinese foot binding. Their feet come to conform and deform to look just like these shoes. We do the same thing in the modern world. This is just like cowboy boots on the left, Nikes on the right. Your feet come to look like the shoes you wear. Here's Steven Tyler with Aerosmith in his cowboy boots he wears all the time. You can see his cross toes, hammer toes that he's got going on. LeBron James on the right side here, you can see his toes as well. Same type of situation, tight basketball shoes. And this is what it looks like from an X-ray standpoint. Same foot, mere moments apart, in a foot-shaped shoe versus a traditional shoe. You can see there's a lot going on, including the sesamoids being kicked over into the nerve space there, and the nerve space being cramped, neuromas, etc. It's just like you look at the image, you're like, oh yeah, no wonder that person's got neuromas coming. I'm a huge believer in correct toes. Just like braces can straighten our teeth out, correct toes can straighten your feet out. Same type of situation. So there's all kinds of foot strengthening drills out there. And again, I'm not talking about wide. So big difference between wide shoes and foot-shaped shoes. Wide shoes are for people who the back half of their foot is wide. A foot-shaped shoe isn't necessarily going to be a good, recommendation for them. However, most people can benefit from a foot-shaped shoe, and I just kind of leave it at this. It's you look at, and this doesn't have to be Altra. It could be any foot-shaped shoe. And I thought this image was really extreme, but basically just choose the outline that matches your foot, right? But as I went back and forth between these images one day as I was preparing a presentation, I was like, oh my gosh, like it's not as extreme as I once thought it was. It's pretty crazy. So to really boil it down and make it easy, our feet should be friends with our shoes. Friends, not friends, make it that simple for your patients. It's a really easy visual. When that happens, good things happen for the feet. And again, the kind of circle of life here. We're born with healthy shaped feet. Our feet get deformed by the shoes we wear. And, with devices like correct toes, foot strengthening exercises, foot shaped shoes, we can be restored back to happy, healthy feet. So plenty more to cover, but I'm out of time. And yeah, thank you guys. It's been fun. I think we got a few minutes for Q&A here. So let's do it.
Thanks, Golden, for that really enlightening talk, and lots of salient points to take away with this. So we're over just by a little bit. I think the timer's off a bit, but so there's about 4 questions in the Q&A. Would you be willing to answer them just with a typed answer as you go?
Yep.
And then what we're going to try to do is we will try to download this and put it in a transcript that we can send out to everybody so they can see the answers. If anybody has questions on Golden's talk that hasn't had time to go out in the chat or the Q&A, feel free to put the questions in there, and we'll get the answers out to you, or send an email to Helen at Helen or Howarth@chasm.ca. So she'll put her email address in the chat. But from now, what I'll do is I'll get Ryan all queued up here. Are you all ready there, Ryan, out on the West Coast?
I am ready.
Awesome. So Ryan is going to chat to us on elements of gait analysis. So Ryan's a certified pedorthist and a pedorthic technician and a co-owner of SoulFit Incorporated. He's got two awesome locations, one in Vancouver and one in Ottawa. So along with a Bachelor of Science degrees, Ryan has over 25 years of experience in the field, including time in Ethiopia, where he worked with some of the world's top runners. And Ryan himself is a former competitive distance runner, running 29:58 PB for a 10K. I almost can do that. He's also completed several multi-day adventure races around the world and raced as a professional triathlete for several years, and is currently involved with ultra running expeditions in remote parts of the globe. So thanks for joining us, Ryan. Nice to have you on the floor again. And take her away.
Thanks, Rich. That's awesome. And Golden, that was a great talk. I could ask a million questions about running shoes. I'd love to ask a million questions about running shoes. When you mentioned HydroFlow, man, that brings me back to the days of shoes. So that was a great talk. And thanks to Chasm and Dawn and the whole team for putting this on, especially in these difficult times. So first of all, Dawn asked for a disclosure, and I don't really have any or conflict of interest that I know of, other than being a co-owner of a clinic that does gait analysis. And thanks for the introduction, Rich. And just, I didn't know if you were going to do an introduction. So where I really find, for me, like it's the balance of my in-clinic experience from, years of doing this, kind of versus my time as an athlete. And I find the time as an athlete really kind of gave me the view to be able to kind of put some of these things into practice for myself. So like Rich mentioned, I did the masochistic, very expensive, time-consuming sport of adventure racing for a few years. Once I ran out of money at a time, I moved on to another very expensive and time-consuming sport of triathlon. Probably my best race was a second overall at the Tremblant 70.3, the first year they had it. But I was probably best known for always finishing one out of the money. That was my kind of claim to fame. Thank goodness I had another job. And then, as Rich said, I moved on to ultra running. So I've been lucky enough to team up with Ray Zahab, who's a bit of a legend in the ultra world. So we've done an expedition across Baffin Island at -50, and then we crossed the Patagonian desert running 50K a day at 50 degrees. So saw a big swing. So just to frame my talk a little bit today, when the team first asked me to do a talk on elements of gait analysis and said that I had 20 to 25 minutes, I was like, well, how would I possibly fit anything in with 20 to 25 minutes? So what I'm hoping to give you guys today is just maybe some, Golden did a great job of presenting some stuff there that really, covers a lot of things that I'm talking about. But also maybe some things that for those of you who aren't already using gait analysis in your clinic, or video gait analysis especially, maybe just some simple things that you can do or some programs that you can use to kind of bring it into your clinic as well. And I've always said, there's probably lots of you out there that know a ton about gait analysis. I've always kind of prided myself with having a really good 30,000-foot view of things. And I do oftentimes find that the low-hanging fruit stuff is left on the table. So what I want to go through today is just looking at, for those of you who are interested in maybe especially doing some video gait analysis, what you'd need, how much accuracy is required to do the job. And then kind of look at a few main things that I'm usually looking for, the lowest hanging fruit that I find can give people the most bang for their buck. And then depending on time, do a little bit of a case study. So the first thing I want to start with is, why would we do video? So why would we use video analysis? And really, you can watch somebody run, and all the things that Golden was talking about and all the things I'll talk about later, we can see those without having to do the video. But I've really found in my years that having the video, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, a video must be worth a book, because, in terms of upping the level of compliance with someone that we have coming through, video is huge for that. So it's kind of, we're showing someone instead of just telling them. So, just as an example, I get so many people coming in where maybe I'm recommending a footwear change, and they've just gone out and spent, $180 on their running shoes, and I'm telling them that they need to get something a little bit different. I'd like to think they take my word for it, but if I'm just showing them or just telling them that, hey, you need to change your shoes, they might. But when I can show them that, hey, this is what's going on with your footwear, this is where there's a bit of a problem, I just find people are so much more likely to go out and make those changes. And also, just to compare videos over time, and we'll talk about different ways to store videos and compare. But, if you're recommending some strength and conditioning, or you're sending somebody out for that, just when they come back into your clinic, just to do a pretty simple side-by-side comparison of videos, again, I just find compliance and patient satisfaction goes up quite a bit. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about some of the hardware tools that you could use. And when I started doing this many years ago, I mean, the cameras were really, really expensive. To get anything that shot at 120 frames per second was going to cost us thousands of dollars. They were really big, they were really bulky. To mount them on the wall, it was super complicated and challenging. Whereas now, my iPhone 11 shoots 120 and 240 frames per second. So the barrier to entry with a lot of this stuff to use in your own clinic is really small. Like if you have a tablet, if you have a newer phone, you can get some really good quality images. So really all you need is a place to run. There's limitations obviously with gait analysis with a treadmill, but a treadmill is probably the easiest way to do it, especially for low-hanging fruit stuff. Or, a long hallway, a place outdoors to run. And the camera side, again, you can use your phone or a tablet. I use a camera called a Yi brand. It's just small, it mounts on the wall really well. And I can do 120, 100 or 240 frames per second. And, but again, you could just use your phone. And for those of you who maybe are investing, I know a few of you out there do have systems, or I've chatted with over the years about maybe getting something in, is the lighting. And when I started in Ottawa 15 years ago, we had a room for our gait analysis that had lots of windows, but the light was always streaming in. When it was really bright, the image quality wasn't really good. So it just wasn't very consistent. When moving into Vancouver, my wife she works for Major Motion Pictures as a lighter. So I had a bit of an inside track on that. So she just got me to get a couple LED light panels, and I spent $400 on Amazon. Not very expensive, but it makes a huge difference with the quality of your video. So I just set those up alongside the treadmill, and it just really makes a lot more consistency in my images that I'm getting, especially and even in Ottawa where we have windows, I close all the blinds now and just use the lights so we can get that quality of lighting. And then from there, so again, the only barrier to entry there is really a camera or your phone, really if you want to do the video analysis. And then just going back to the software. So, again, and when I started with this, there weren't a whole lot of options available, but even on a simple app for your tablet or on your phone, you can do some pretty good gait analysis where you have some simple drawing tools. You can put the videos side by side to compare, and you can scrub the videos through pretty easily. So you can go frame by frame through to get some pretty good quality images. I find probably the biggest players in this field right now are Dartfish Express, Coach's Eye, and Huddle Technique. And they're about $100 to $200 a year. I think a lot of them have free versions as well, but this would probably be the simplest way of incorporating a little bit of video analysis into your clinic. And then for those of you who maybe are looking at upgrading that a little bit, I find some advantages to desktop systems. Is one, it just, again, I find on the compliance side, if you have the space, I have a big monitor, just maybe a placebo effect. People are seeing it on this big screen, it looks really cool. So I like that, but also just for storing the videos, for archiving videos over time and having them be able to come back and compare, recommendations that you made to see if things have changed. That's the advantage of a desktop. I use Dartfish 360, so I'll show you some of the videos of what I use. Canovia, Silicone Coach, Quintech Sports. Those are all good options for desktop systems as well that I've played around with over the years. But I like right now I like Dartfish. And then, so I hinted on earlier, there are certainly, I think if we're looking at, especially looking at the last 5 to 10% of, we have an elite runner that's looking for that last little bit of efficiency, or you know, you have a runner that's crossed off some of the low-hanging fruit stuff that I'm going to talk about. You know, I would argue that maybe you need to have someone off a treadmill, that you do need to start putting body markings on and getting into more advanced 3D motion capture. And for those of you out there maybe who are, motion metrics, 3D Gait, Kinetic Gait, that's Reid Ferber, Canadian doctor who started those, Qualisys. And, you know, when I started here in Vancouver, I looked into motion metrics, and, you know, very, very cool display. You know, it shows, you know, lateral forces, you know, overstriding. It shows the exact numbers, vertical displacement. So I really liked, again, the visual component, but I kind of, again, found end of the day, is it really going to change what I'm giving to my patients from a low hanging fruit perspective? So, you know, at that point, I wasn't willing to put the $10,000 to $15,000 in. So, you know, I find we can do usually a pretty good job with either that app or the desktop system. And then the last one, some of you might be interested, is a company called Plantiga. I have no relationship with them other than they're a Vancouver-based company. They actually have an insole that goes into your shoes that will kind of look at some of those more specific metrics. And it'd be really cool. Again, I'd love to chat with Golden about this sometime, about checking, you know, the carbon-plated shoes versus, you know, a minimalist shoe versus a traditional shoe, and just seeing if some of those metrics actually do change. So, you know, this stuff is getting more accessible and less expensive as we go. But the, you know, I think really the app or a desktop version is probably a great way to start with that. So if you are, so whether or not you're using a video system, or you're just kind of looking at people and kind of giving them feedback, this kind of, again, this piggybacks on Golden's talk really well, where, you know, I really find that, you know, I'm not a big fan of conscious changes when you run. I do like some of the tips that Golden gave out, but, you know, chi running, pose running, evolution running, you know, all kinds of great ways of learning how to run better. But I really find one of the questions that we don't ask enough when we're looking at running biomechanics and we're doing gait analysis is, well, why are we not running right? You know, so why are we not doing things right in the first place? So, you know, I'll get into some of the videos of, you know, barefoot versus shod as well. And, you know, I would certainly agree with Golden that, you know, shoes are a big part of the problem. I remember being at a talk many years ago during the minimalist running boom, and, you know, there was an expert who was firmly against it, talking about how, you know, we run the best we can with what we have. So why would we change things? Why would we make big changes? And, you know, I would agree with that I think we generally run as well as we can with what we have, but I would argue that what we have generally sucks. I think our infrastructure generally isn't very good. So, you know, I really think one of the things we need to focus on more, even when we're doing gait analysis, is not necessarily giving people cues, but looking at why those things are happening in the first place, and fixing those. Similar to Golden, I had an experience where I spent a couple of weeks in Ethiopia, and I was working at an elite running camp, and, you know, some of the top runners in the world, you know, fallen arches, flat feet, you know, genu valgums, dropped hips, you know, one arm higher than the other. And, you know, these are people that are running 2:03 marathons and 26-minute 10Ks for the men, and, you know, 2:20 marathons for the women. And wow, they're doing okay with those flat feet and those genu valgums and those dropped hips, you know. So but pretty much across the board, what I saw really strong feet, really strong intrinsics, and mobile, flexible hips, because they don't sit all day and they predominantly don't wear shoes growing up. So they've kind of nurtured the infrastructure that they're born with. So that kind of carries into what I'm really looking at when I do my analysis. And I'm really kind of breaking this down into what are my short-term goals and what are my long-term goals. And, you know, I really feel strongly that in the short term, I really want to focus on keeping a runner running. So if that means providing a few Band-Aids to get them through an injury or get them through their marathon in a couple months, yeah, you know, oftentimes making big changes when someone has a big race coming up or they have an injury, maybe that's not the best time to do it. So I'm going to go through a few things that I might look at there, but then, you know, not losing sight of where do we want to take them down the road. And this is, I think, a really important distinction when we're looking at running biomechanics is, Yeah, like patient compliance is going to play in huge in terms of what we're able to do with those long-term goals. If someone's interested in doing the work to really fix things, then yeah, we should definitely get someone away from the overly protective shoes and potentially orthotics or everything else. But if they're not, yeah, we have to weigh out, do we maybe need a few band-aids in place? So let me just do a screen share here. Rich, can you just nod if you can see that? You can see the, okay. So this is just an example of someone that I had in not long ago. And this is a marathon runner that had a marathon coming up in 3 weeks. They had some tib posterior tendonitis on the right foot. And they were going to be training. They were going to be continuing to train. So, really, regardless of what we talked about in terms of the long-term issues that we want to work on, this person was going to be running through an injury training for a marathon, which I know none of you ever see runners that run through injuries. We never see that stuff. So in the short term, when I'm doing analysis on this person, they are overpronating significantly. So, and I think to Golden's point, that's really interesting that they find that motion control really doesn't make significant differences. But I got to say, in the 15 years that I've been doing this, that especially as a short-term tool to treat certain types of injury, I do see shoe changes as something that can kind of help in that short term. So this person is overstriding, so all the points that Golden mentioned about an overstride, foot landing too far out in front of center of mass, 3 to 5 times more impact, that's all happening with this guy who's going to be running a marathon in 3 months. So what I'm looking at in this case is, well, what are some low-hanging fruit things that I can throw into the mix right away that can help get him through that marathon that is going to be running either way? So we did change shoes. We did put him in a motion control shoe that, even if it just controlled the rate of pronation, it gave him some pretty substantial relief. We just taped his arches up a little bit. We didn't want to put an orthotic in because he's going to be training a lot. But that in the short term, that really made a big difference in terms of relieving the symptoms and getting through the race. And then in a minute, I'll talk about some of the long-term stuff that we do. With him, we'd recommended that, okay, once you're better, and once we got you through the race, come back in the off season and let's work on really fixing things. So let's work at deconstructing shoe and, trying to get that cadence increased and get that foot more below. So, I think that balance of those short-term goals versus the long-term goals is really important. And, just another example, this is a woman that came in, IT band issues. I can't remember even which side, but in terms of asymmetries, and kind of like I talked about with my time in Ethiopia, I saw a lot of asymmetries on people that were running really fast. One of the guys who owned the camp that I was at, sorry, I'm just going to stop the screen share for a minute. One of the guys at the clinic that the camp that I was at, Haile Gebrselassie, he's one of the top runners of all time. So, multiple world record holder, multiple gold medalist. He ran with one arm quite high, and they think it's because he ran to school with books on one side. So he developed a little bit of a high arm carriage. But he runs a 2:03 marathon. So it's kind of that debate of, do you change it? So where I'm focusing on when I'm looking at gait analysis, I'm more comparing the injury that I'm seeing with potential asymmetries, because we're always going to find stuff. There's always going to be something. So I don't want someone to leave going, oh my God, I'm a mess. I'm not running right and I just shouldn't run. I want to kind of make sure I'm giving someone a real practical, okay, based on the injury you're presenting with, this is something that we can deal with that will give you the most bang for your buck. And, I find A, that's more likely to take care of the injury, but B, I find that person's compliance is going to go way up. So let me share this screen again. So this is again, so this woman, when she landed on her left foot, everything was pretty straight through the hips. Now, when she landed on her right side, which transferred over, we see this right hip kicking out and we see the left hip dropping. So this is kind of classic Trendelenburg. We did some muscle testing and found that for her, it was definitely a glute med not firing on her right side. So that's a pretty low hanging fruit thing that we can look at to say, well, yeah, you're coming in with lower back and IT band issues. Let's maybe send you off to do some specific strengthening for your hip. Let's work on kind of balancing things out to make sure that you're a little bit more symmetrical. So when I'm really looking at that analysis, I'm looking at what's the injury someone's presenting with, and then how again can I get the most bang for their buck. And then this is touching on Golden's talk a little bit more, and I couldn't agree more with a lot of the things that he's saying. And where again I would maybe hammer home to some of you who are working with a few more runners that are contemplating doing some analysis, and especially maybe looking at some video analysis. I'd love to do a video of barefoot versus shod, so in their shoes versus barefoot. And this is, to me, like if we're looking at the long-term side of how to improve gait, having someone run barefoot is such a good way to show them, what's going on. And I'm just going to take this off again for a minute. So analogy I would make. So running, I always say one of the best biomechanical teachers around is the ground. It's very, very unforgiving. And it'll tell you very quickly, if you're jamming your heel out in front and landing on your heel. So if we took something like swimming, and let's say we took someone who didn't know how to swim, and not that I would recommend doing this, but let's say we took a person who didn't know how to swim and we threw them in the water. Our instinct as humans ancestrally in water, if we didn't know how to swim, would we do everything we can to keep our head above the water. So that would be a good thing to do if you don't know how to swim, and you're in water. It wouldn't be, nice Michael Phelps swim technique. So running is very different though, where we take someone on a treadmill and we have them run barefoot. They run better almost immediately. So exactly like Golden said, we take that shoe away and it hurts to throw your heel out in front and land on your heel. So typically when we're doing, I'm going to screen share again. So typically when we're doing the, oops, sorry guys. So typically when we're doing this analysis, 80 to 85%, I think Golden said 83% of runners run on their heel with their foot way out in front of center of mass. Yeah, we're going to see that percentage of people coming in that are throwing that foot out in front and they're landing way out in front, crashing on their heel. Now, what this is going to lead to, all the things that Golden mentioned, you got that extra impact up through the system. You're oftentimes increasing vertical oscillation, more up and down. Cadence is oftentimes going to be a lot slower. Where I take someone's shoes off and I have them run barefoot, things change almost immediately in 99% of those cases. Again, because it hurts not to. So that foot is dropping below. They're landing more midfoot. It's Golden's great analogy. If you take someone and you have them jump off a box, you're never going to land straight leg on your heel. You're going to bend your knees. You're going to use your body as a spring. So I would argue that when you take someone's shoes off and you have them run barefoot, they're now running as well as they can with what they have. So now the focus is on improving, well, how do we now improve what they have? And I really like Golden's talk about shoes, where I think shoes are a huge part of the problem in terms of why we're at where we're at. We put kids in these elevated shoes that shorten everything up in the back of our leg and lift up our toes, and it's crazy we do that with kids. But if you have someone who's 30 or 40 or 50 who's been in those shoes for a long time and combine that with maybe sitting all day, we're going to have really limited hip extension, and we're going to have real big issues with foot intrinsics and length through the back part of the leg. So oftentimes what I'm recommending with this is just to show people, hey, look how much differently you run when you're barefoot. But hey, let's make the changes outside of the shoes first, and let's get them in for massage. Let's get them in for therapy. Let's open up the hips. Let's work on foot strength. And where I find even on the minimalist shoe side, I mean, Altra is one of my favorite brands. I'm actually running in those right now. I think maybe when the minimalist movements start, we might have maybe missed our mark a little bit in terms of where we pushed minimalist shoes first. Where I really find that where we missed our mark is to push minimalist shoes to casual wear day to day. So running, there's just a lot more involved. Again, there's a lot more impact, and yeah, it can just be tricky with someone training for an event to make those changes in a short enough time to really see improvement without causing new injuries. We don't want to trade off one problem for another. Whereas with casual wear, to get someone in a flatter shoe day to day, that's almost, to me, like, why wouldn't we start someone with a flatter shoe? And this is very similar to Golden's picture that he had, but this is just one that I saw today that someone posted on Instagram of, someone in a shoe with an elevated heel versus kind of a flatter shoe. So I really think that if we're spending more of our day in a flat shoe, where we're lengthening everything out on the back of our leg, we're starting to get the intrinsics in our feet a little bit stronger, we're getting used to feeling the ground, we're getting all those mechanoreceptors on the bottom of our feet a little bit more engaged. And if we're then maybe taking some time to work on opening up our hips, to work on strengthening our feet with the shoes, well, then I find oftentimes that we can start to incorporate it into the running as well. So that's my 20 to 25 minutes, guys. I mean, there's so many more nuances, pieces that can go into this, but hopefully that gives you maybe a few little things to look for in practice, and maybe how to integrate some video analysis into your clinic.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Just if we got some time for some questions. So first question from anonymous attendee. Do you have any comments on the efficacy or accuracy of things like RunScribe or a Garmin FootPod? In a virtual world, I'm curious how or if we can effectively assess running gait if we don't have a runner in the office with us.
Yeah, I think using all those metrics as comparisons over time, I think can be really helpful. In terms of efficacy, I can't really speak too much on those. Golden could maybe speak on that a little bit more. It'd be great to have a panel on some of this stuff as well. But I like using, again, I really do like using cadence. I find that gives people a really good ballpark of kind of where they're at. I've heard Garmin can do a pretty good job of counting that. I love old school stuff of like just getting somebody, again, use a metronome or put a metronome on their phone and go and run at a 170 or 180 beats per minute and follow the beats. But as far as assessing gait from someone's metrics based on their Garmin wear, I would love to actually see someone running in front of me.
Awesome. I think that's the only one question that was on there. So I guess we'll just wait and see if people have more questions to add it in there. I guess a couple of questions I see that you've got a TV up on the wall behind the tread or in front of the treadmill there. Do you do that for like immediate feedback, or what? How would you utilize that?
No, I sometimes just I run through some videos of just showing good running technique and kind of things that we might be looking for in the long term. So I kind of use it just more for patient education.
Yeah. And well, I've got your attention in front of a national audience. I might as well grab it. I find a lot of the treadmills these days actually have the console is so huge. To find a minimal console so you can get an adequate view from a full frontal view for a frontal plane assessment I find that actually much more useful than doing a rear or a posterior assessment. I guess, do you have any recommendations or knowledge of ones that aren't like the Woodway ones?
Yeah, if we're taking price out of the equation, have you seen the Assault treadmills? So those things are amazing. I think those probably equalize things out a little bit more. There's even Emily Schleichel. She does a lot of work. She's a great podiatrist. She does a lot of work with engaging proprioceptors and mechanoreceptors on the bottom of her feet. And she even has a Nabaso insoles, and you can actually cover the Assault treadmill with Nabaso mat, for feedback for runners. So I would love to use something like that. I mean, a Woodway would be ideal. Any of those really medical oriented treadmills. I mean, I've drooled over those consistently. I do the best I can, again, with a commercial grade treadmill, but it's by no means perfect. And, I would, just based on what I was saying before, I would argue to do true gait analysis, someone's got to be marked up and someone's got to be outside. I mean, I think treadmills just change the firing patterns that I think it's enough to see low hanging fruit. but I don't think it's enough for the last 5 to 10%. So, you know, like I said earlier, I think I'm a good 30,000 foot view guy that, you know, if I had somebody coming in and was an elite runner that we've covered low hanging fruit, but they're looking for that last little bit of efficiency, I'm sending them out to a lab. Like I'm sending them out where they can get marked, and ideally I even have them outside.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, totally
Golden,
agree
yeah.
with that. And I think it actually pertains to the earlier question about efficacy, accuracy of run scribe and Garmin Footpod. Those things are fairly accurate for what they measure. They're actually pretty good. But they don't measure some of that stuff. And if you're really trying to get something from a patient, it's pretty easy to have them take a modern phone and have somebody film them while they don't know they're being filmed as they run by. You know, if you can just get either a front or a rear view, and most importantly, a side view, you know, you're going to see exactly what's going on with most people. And then, you know, I mentioned as well, just look at their shoes. I mean, have them take a picture of their bottom of their shoes, and you're going to see where the wear pattern is too. So those are really easy ways to do it that are super effective if you can't get them to a lab. You know, just get a video of them running outside, like you say, Ryan, and then maybe get a picture of their shoes.
Cool. Yeah, the Canova program is pretty cool because it shows angles in real time, but it's hard to do that. So a couple other quick questions. Do you have any comments about knee KG?
No.
I haven't heard about that.
No.
Have you heard about that, Cora?
Golden, do you know?
No, I don't know what knee KG is.
Sorry, I'm getting my learning today. I'm gonna look that up.
Yeah, me too.
Sorry.
Time to go do some research, I guess.
Exactly.
I'm gonna be looking that up tomorrow.
Who's got the
Send us a link.
Exactly.
All right.
Sorry, Golden, just to you, you mentioned HydroFlow in the start of your talk. I mean,
Oh,
I could nerd all day. I mean, back in the days of HydroFlow. So
I think we need to set up a call, you and I.
Yeah, for sure.
Have a fun phone conversation.
Hey, if I can just be a fly on the wall, I'd love that.
Somebody also asked about running in military boots, and I answered it, and it made it disappear. I have seen video analysis of that, and it's not pretty. So I don't know about you, Ryan.
Oof, yeah. If you want some horrible shin pain, then sure, but yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Cucuzella in West Virginia, he's doing gait training with the Air Force.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a dramatic difference, and they're actually conducting some studies on injury reduction, and yeah, they know that the boots are injuring people, and their dropout rate from injuries is ridiculous. It's just absurd. And I think the boots are a big part of that. Knee KG is another form of gait analysis. Emovi.ca. All right, got to look that one up. Thank you, Philippe and Roger.
All right. So I think if there's more questions, just put them in the question and answer period. And other than that, let's move on to the esteemed Dr. Paul Dorian. So Dr. Dorian was the Department Director, Division of Cardiology at the University of Toronto from 2007 to 2019, and he is staff cardiac electrophysiologist at St. Mike's Hospital. He's a professor of medicine at the University of Toronto and a staff scientist at the Li Ka-shing Knowledge Institute. He is a recipient of the University of Toronto Department of Medicine Research Award and the Canadian Cardiovascular Society and Canadian Heart Rhythm Society Achievement Awards. Dr. Dorian is also the past president of the Canadian Heart Rhythm Society. His research interests include resuscitation science, basic science research in advanced cardiac life support and atrial fibrillation, sports cardiology, arrhythmias in athletes, and clinical research on implanted devices, antiarrhythmic drugs, and the quality of life in patients with arrhythmias. So Dr. Dorian, Paul, you have the floor.
Thank you so very much. I hope everybody can hear me. Let me just try to share my screen here. This is going to be a fairly typical scientific talk, lots of slides and lots of data. If I bore anybody, please stop me. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Good. let me just tell you a little bit about how I became to be interested in sports cardiology, because it might be relevant. My sports growing up were table tennis and then water polo at a fairly high level, and then tennis. I basically started doing endurance sport in my 30s because I had a bunch of kids and not enough time. And I became quite interested in that. But what really got me interested in sports cardiology was two things. And I think this will be a theme, I hope, for many of you who care for patients who might benefit from cardiac evaluation or may need cardiac evaluation. And the first came from the fact that my special interest is in heart rhythm disturbances. And as you probably know, many patients or many athletes who have extraordinarily effective cardiovascular systems, if they have a problem that requires a cardiologist, it's often a rhythm problem, sometimes ventricular premature beats or atrial fibrillation, or even rarely sustained arrhythmias, atrial or ventricular. And I started to see some of these patients, and I became aware that many cardiologists, not all, but many cardiologists that don't have a special interest in sports cardiology have absolutely no clue what athletes' values and preferences are. And they have absolutely no clue how hard many of the patients that I see, and many of probably all of you in this audience, and many individuals interested in sports medicine, and many of the millions of people in the country that are invested in exercise for the sake of sport and pleasure and training and getting fit. To give you an example, the most often cited cardiology, not textbook, but the cardiology review that counsels cardiologists as to the potential risks of vigorous sport defines vigorous activity as anything greater than 6 metabolic equivalents. And that's equivalent to jogging at a 10 minutes per kilometer pace. I don't know about most of you, but most of the patients that I see wouldn't even put their shoes on to run at a 10 minutes per kilometer pace. And that yet is defined as vigorous activity. So when cardiologists talk to patients, they'll say, don't do anything more than walk at a fast pace. Anything more than that is likely to harm your heart. Now, we're talking about cardiac patients, of course. So I became actually quite frustrated with the sort of misunderstanding in the cardiology world of both the values and preferences of athletes who really like to exercise and do so for pleasure and get a lot of benefit out of it, and from what I saw as an overemphasis on caution, safety when it wasn't necessary, overestimation of risk, and underestimation of benefit. What we have time for today, and we can talk about lots of other things as well, is of course, and what I should say is half the fun I have in my cardiology clinic is I talk to individuals about their specific sport, about the intensity and pace, which no cardiologist has ever asked them before when they do their sport. How fast are they running? How fast are they swimming? How fast are they cycling? And what kind of intensity, what kind of heart rate, what kind of distances? It's not a question that most cardiologists ever ask. What we have time for today is something that is a particular pet peeve of mine, is the misrepresentation in the lay literature. To some extent, this may filter down to your patients when they come to talk to you, but a misrepresentation of the risk of sport. And we'll go over that in a bit of detail over the next 20 minutes, and I hope we have time for questions. Obviously, sports cardiology, as you can imagine, is something that we can't really cover in 20 minutes. I have no relevant disclosures for this particular presentation. So what I'm going to do is talk a bit about the epidemiology of endurance sport, the possible risks of endurance sport, and a little bit, if there's a bit of time, on return to play. So first, I think there's something that we need to think about, which is how quickly the heart adapts to physical exercise. Much of the really fantastic work is done from Dr. Ben Levine's group at the University of Texas. And what they did was they took a bunch of sedentary individuals, average age is about 45, generally untrained. These are not lifelong endurance athletes. And they looked for volunteers who were willing to undergo a one-year program, a graduated program, to culminate in running a marathon. In the first 3 months, they were basically walking. In the second 3 months, they were running at slow speeds. In the third 3 months, they started training the way probably most of you and most of your patients train. And the last 3 months were kind of building up to the marathon. And what's really interesting is if we look at the cardiac adaptation, it actually doesn't take that long. These are untrained 45 to 50-year-old individuals, and within 9 months of building up to maybe 40, 50 kilometers a week, jogging or running at a slow pace, they already get almost maximal dilatation of the heart. Your heart gets bigger as you exercise, as you all know. So the left-hand panel here, the LV and diastolic volume is the size of the heart. The right ventricle dilates almost within 6 months, a little bit earlier, and the wall thickness or physiological hypertrophy, just like your biceps gets bigger when you lift weights, your heart gets bigger when you exercise. This is running, this is not resistance exercise. You get most of the hypertrophy you're going to get within 3 months. So the bottom line is this: is the heart can adapt to increasing physiological load extremely quickly, much faster than most people believe. The next item that I think is extremely important to think about for lifelong athletes, I'm talking about the benefits first, and we'll talk a bit about the risks, is that there is what used to be thought an invariable age-related stiffening of the heart. And by the way, if you have any of your patients who are relatively sedentary or not terribly fit or don't exercise regularly, and they complain they get short of breath after a couple of flights of stairs, I am absolutely convinced that this is, if you like, on a continuum of what we call diastolic heart failure, or so-called heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. Obviously, we're not talking about heart failure here, but basically most people's hearts get stiffer as they get older, much worse if you're obese, much worse if you have hypertension. And sedentary individuals have this problem much worse than people who are committed lifelong exercisers, both committed meaning running on the average about 40 kilometers a week at a moderate pace over 20 to 30 years. Competitive here, we'll give you the data, the detailed data in just a second. These are age 68 who've been competing in not necessarily Ironmans, but competing in marathons, half marathons, Olympic triathlons, etc. So the first thing is that when you look at a cross-sectional analysis at average age 68, not surprisingly, you find that people who are committed, these are not competitive athletes, they're all the same age, in their late 60s, have a higher oxygen carrying capacity than people who are committed competitive athletes. Absolutely unsurprising. But the more important thing, and this just gets a little bit detailed, actually this is a little bit out of sequence here, I apologize. I'm going to come to the significance of this particular finding on diastolic function, which is what prevents us from getting shorter breath on exercise. So I apologize, the slides are a bit out of order. Let's talk a little bit about perhaps the most important topic is what your patients are reading and what some of you may be reading, and what has now become a meme in some corners of sports cardiology, which is a little bit of exercise is great, much better than being sedentary. Moderate exercise, defined as roughly 150 minutes per week of brisk walk. That it gives you, that's the general belief, is that gives you most of the cardiac benefits of exercise. And any more than that, you're doing either for pleasure, but possibly for harm. So there's this general belief out there, promoted largely or most sort of vociferously by Dr. O'Keefe and his colleagues at the Mayo Clinic, but you'll read this all over the internet, or the patients will read all over the internet. This is just a typical example of some of the stuff that individuals, this is from a medical journal, but you can get this for sort of lay public. And the general philosophy here is that a little bit of exercise is good, too much exercise is bad. And the first paragraph here, I'm just quoting everything in black here is my own commentary, and in behind the sort of mustard color is Dr. O'Keefe's statements directly from his article. He says a safe upper dose limit potentially exists. I think that's unknown and probably incorrect. And the reasons that our patients, and maybe some of your patients, are counseled against continued endurance exercise over a lifetime is because of the concern that in some individuals, exercise can cause fibrosis. That is partially true. I'll show you data from University of Toronto in a minute, but I think it's unimportant. The belief is that people who exercise vigorously have a higher risk of developing coronary calcification, which we know is associated with the risk of myocardial infarction. This is partially true, but for athletes, I'll show you the data, it's irrelevant. The further belief is that veteran endurance athletes have a 5-fold increase in the prevalence of atrial fibrillation. That's an exaggeration. It's probably a 3-fold increase, but this is the relative increase fallacy. Veteran endurance athletes about age 50 to 60 have an absolute risk of atrial fibrillation of 3 per 1,000 per year, versus non-endurance athletes may have a risk of 1 per 1,000 per year. So the absolute risk, not the relative risk, is very, very small indeed. Although it is true that long-term endurance athletes have a slightly higher risk of atrial fibrillation. I see tons of these patients. I tell them not to worry. I tell them to continue their sport. We can talk about that in the question period if you like. The major concern that many individuals who are sort of in this camp have are based on the observations that immediately after a marathon, particularly immediately after an Ironman, there is a predictable slight increase in cardiac enzyme release. This does not mean permanent cardiac damage. This may be related to a minor degree of injury, mostly to the right ventricle and maybe the atria. I think it's clinically irrelevant. Athletes recover from this. It's not a big deal. And then there's also observations of transient right ventricular dysfunction, for example, after an Ironman. It's a true observation, but it's rarely, if ever, clinically relevant. The consequence of these beliefs is the following graph, which you will see reproduced in many different places on the internet, in medical journals. And I think it's, quite frankly, complete BS. And this is here a dotted line because this is unproven, and I'll show you in a minute for this. There's virtually no good evidence for this type of illustration, and the belief is that there's being sedentary is bad. This is the guidelines for exercise. Here we're talking, again, I'll repeat, 150 minutes of rapid walking is kind of what's recommended. You exercise a little more. Allegedly, this is good for you, but it is believed that there is a level of exercise beyond which you're going to harm your heart and you're going to increase the risk of adverse cardiac events, myocardial infarction, heart failure, and arrhythmias, and that it's virtually certainly incorrect. So let's look at the evidence why this is incorrect. This is a paper that Dr. O'Keefe actually cites as in favor of the hypothesis of too much exercise is bad for you. I'm not going to give you the detailed detail here, but this is a 364,000 observational study in Taiwan. And when they looked at the most vigorous individuals in this particular group, the very high volume exercisers, probably not exercising on the average at an intensity that many of your athletes in your practices exercise, or some of you may exercise at. We're probably talking about exercising at sort of a moderate level. You can see that the overall mortality with vigorous activity done for decades is 0.67 of the sedentary group. So in other words, a 33% reduction in all-cause mortality. Let's look at some other evidence, which is probably more relevant for those of you and the patients of yours and the general public that wants to exercise at a very high level. This particular study looked at 122,000 patients who had stress tests roughly at around age 35 or 40 and followed them for several decades. And they looked at this is age 53, and they followed them for 1.1 million person years of observation. So an extraordinarily large database. And what they looked at was the long-term outcome in patients stratified by the level of fitness at the baseline treadmill study. And the elite were the people who were in the top 3 percentile of fitness. Most of these individuals ran about 13 or 14 minutes on the Bruce protocol. So these are really very fit individuals. But I would gather not any more fit than some probably of people in this audience, or more fit than the kinds of patients that you see who run 10Ks at a pretty high pace, let's say less than 40 minutes, or are running marathons at 3.5 hours or less. So we're not talking about elite athletes here. We're just talking about individuals that exercise regularly at pretty high intensity. And you can see that mortality, all-cause mortality, decreases consistently as you are more fit. There's no lower sort of bottom limit here. In other words, continuous linear improvement in mortality, less and less deaths, despite the fact that they controlled for things like smoking and hypertension and obesity, all of which obviously are associated with sedentary lifestyle. So the highly fit individuals are less likely to smoke and have diabetes and hypertension and all other things which are associated with longevity reduction. And they corrected for that. If they didn't correct for that, the benefit in mortality would be even more dramatic. The point here is that there's no lower limit. The fittest people live the longest. This is a meta-analysis of all of the randomized clinical trials ever done with respect to cardiovascular mortality, published this year or this past year in British Journal of Sports Medicine. You're talking here about 500,000 individuals published in 50 or 100 mostly cohort studies. Obviously, these are not controlled clinical trials. We've never randomized patients to sedentary lifestyle on the one hand versus long-term endurance exercise on the other. These are observational studies. They all have limitations, but the observation nevertheless is that there's no upper limit of a benefit with respect to the amount of exercise. I've just arbitrarily drawn the line here for you. The blue line is what I would estimate as a runner who runs approximately 6 times a week at 6-minute kilometers. So this is people, most of your friends and yourselves and your patients who are, training for marathon or regular runners. It is true, I think we have to understand that it is true that mortality goes down progressively rapidly from being unfit, which is very high risk, to individuals that are more fit. And there is not a tremendous amount of longevity benefit to being an endurance runner versus somebody who jogs, let's say, 2 or 3 times a week. But the point here is not that you're going to buy an infinite amount of life by being a vigorous endurance runner, but there's no loss of benefit. The more you run, the benefit is attenuated at very high levels of endurance, but it's not lost. The more you run, the longer you live, although most of the benefit goes from going from sedentary to running or jogging, if you like, a couple of times a week. If you look at all-cause mortality, this is often misinterpreted here. All-cause mortality, the benefit is largely lost at very high levels of activity. You can see here that the confidence intervals are extremely wide. We don't really know if this is sloped upwards or downwards. This is what people seize on. I personally think that this is not particularly meaningful. Most of your mortality benefit, if you look at all-cause mortality, because most people don't necessarily die from cardiac disease, they may die from cancer or injury or other things, you get from moderate levels of exercise. But the point still remains that I don't think there's such a thing as too much exercise for the majority of individuals. Obviously, if you have cardiac disease, that's a different story. We're now talking about healthy people without known cardiac disease. This was the slide that was out of order, and I apologize for that. It's a complicated slide, but basically the steepness of slope of this particular line, without getting into the detailed physiology, represents diastolic function. We know that during vigorous activity, our heart rate increases. The time between heartbeats is short. Our ventricles have to suck blood. They pump blood during systole, but they have to suck blood during diastole. This is an energy-consuming active activity, and individuals that are unfit have stiff hearts, and when their heart rate increases, the pressure inside the ventricle and therefore the pressure inside the lungs increases, and that causes shortness of breath. It is my belief that what causes shortness of breath in virtually everybody, but particularly as they get older, is a stiff heart. It's not necessarily the exercising muscles being inefficient. And you can see here that competitive exercisers have larger hearts, but the slope of this relationship between heart size on the x-axis and wedge pressure on the y-axis, which is a measure of lung pressure, is attenuated and less steep. So an exerciser, lifelong exerciser, large heart volumes, exercising will have a wedge pressure of 8 or 10, but an unfit person exercising will have a wedge pressure of 16 to 20. And this kind of wedge pressure gives you pulmonary edema if it's maintained. In the short term, it makes you short of breath. To get back to the lifelong exerciser issue, and again, I apologize, the slides were a bit out of order. This is a sub-analysis, if you like, of one of the large meta-analysis of athletes with respect to longevity. And the reason I outlined this is now we're talking about people who are aged over 60 years. So you can make an argument that if you're young and if you're a young adult, for example, then you can exercise as much as you want. You're not going to hurt yourself. And the argument could be made that this potential risk of too much exercise is potentially salient for the oldest individuals that you might guess are at highest risk of, if you like, overdoing it, but that in fact is not the case. You can see here that people who exercise up to 5,000 MET minutes a week, we're talking about 60 to 80 kilometers running per week at a pretty fast pace. And their all-cause mortality was half as much as people who are sedentary. This is 0 MET minutes per week, but you can just look at the numbers. This is the relative risk of dying at people over age 60 as a function of the volume of exercise. And you can see there's a monotonic decreased risk from 1 to 1.1 to 0.9 to 0.7 to 0.6 to 0.6 to 0.5 with increasing levels of exercise. Again, emphasizing that there is no upper limit, in my opinion, of safe exercise in otherwise healthy individuals. Now we're talking about people who exercise every day. So we often hear about, what about the weekend warriors? What about people who don't exercise Monday to Friday, but go out and work really hard on the weekends? They cycle, they cross-country ski, they go for long weekend runs. Are they harming themselves by intermittent exercise? And the answer is no. This is one of the best papers on this topic, published about 2 years ago. And they're now looking at, again, on the x-axis, you have minutes per week of physical activity. So some people are weekend warriors and they may go out for 200-kilometer bike rides on Saturday and Sunday and do nothing during the week. Other people kind of space it out during the week. But you can see that when the x-axis is total weekly exercise, there's a monotonic, again, most benefit is with a small amount, but there's continued benefit with more exercise, whether you do it spaced out during the week or whether you crowd it all in on Saturdays and Sundays. Doesn't matter. As long as you're getting the activity in, there's no upper limit of safety, even if you're cramming it all in on Saturdays or Sundays. Let's talk a little bit about coronary artery calcification. It is true, this is a really large study from the Cooper Health Clinic. They did standard coronary calcium, which is a test we don't do a lot in Canada. It probably doesn't add much to your standard prediction of cardiac disease when you look at your patients and you look at their smoking habit and their blood pressure and their blood sugar and their body weight and their exercise level and their family history. You get most of the information you want about the future risk of coronary events. In the United States, it's very popular because people make money doing coronary calciums, and they can frighten their patients by saying, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Jones, whatever the name might be, you have a high coronary calcium. And it is true that coronary calcium adds a little bit to the future prediction in the general population of the risk of coronary events. High coronary calcium is associated with a higher risk of coronary events, and particularly if the coronary calcium is greater than 100 what's called Agatston units. So what they found was when they looked at prevalent coronary calcification, it is true that the committed regular exercisers tended to have more coronary calcium than the sedentary individuals or those who exercise less. This is now believed to result in a higher risk of myocardial infarction. This may be true in sedentary individuals, but it is not true in athletes. So what we can see here is that independently of the amount of coronary calcium, so let's look at the high coronary calcium patients. I can assure you, if you're in the United States and you go to your cardiologist and you have a coronary CT scan and you have more than 100 Agatston units, your cardiologist will say, not incorrectly, you're maybe at risk of myocardial infarction. You should stop smoking and lose weight and exercise. But if you happen to be an athlete, you're probably told, stop running because you're going to kill yourself. This is not true. So the highest activity category individuals had a substantial reduction in all-cause mortality and in cardiovascular mortality. Obviously, the numbers have wide confidence intervals because there's not that many patients, so that whether you age adjust or fully adjust for all other risk factors, there's a continued reduction in risk from cardiovascular events, even amongst the individuals who have high coronary calcium. This is now compared to people who don't have high coronary calcium. So athletes, even if they have calcium deposits in their arteries, these deposits tend to be non-atherogenic. They are low cholesterol plaques, and they tend not to cause problems. probably not a desirable thing to have high coronary calcium, but much less severe or much less problematic than is often said to be. The best data, as far as I'm concerned, on the longevity benefit of exercise comes from the very, very elegant studies done by the Vassalopet organizers. This is a long cross-country ski race of 90 kilometers. That's a cultural phenomenon in Sweden. We can talk about the details, but let's say that each of the individuals that participates in this race from age 20 to age 90 is capable of skiing in northern Sweden in the dark, in cold weather, 90 kilometers every January. And they probably train quite hard. So first of all, when you look at the mortality of skiers versus non-skiers, this is controlling for age and sex and hypertension and diabetes and so on and so forth, that skiers overall, that we're talking about people who are committed year after year participate in this 90 kilometer. This is like marathon runners in Sweden. So I think we can fairly safely assume that these individuals are fairly highly trained and they have a much less mortality than non-skiers. And as follow-up prolongs, you can see that the mortality curves diverge. So increasing benefit over time. Even more interesting, and I think important and often not emphasized enough, is a recent paper that the same authors looked at, where they looked at the finishing time of the racers versus longevity. So the x-axis here is percent of winning time. The arbitrarily, the mortality of those who finished at twice the winning time of the winner is given a mortality of 1. So you can see that these are individuals who participated in the race, but they took 4 times as long to finish the race as the winners. The winners are obviously extremely fit 20-somethings here. We're talking about elite athletes. But so, for example, if the winning time of a marathoner is 2 hours, this would be equivalent to a marathon of 8 hours, okay? They still have a lower mortality than the people, obviously, who don't run marathons, but this is the people who are within 10% of the winning time. So extrapolate to marathons. Here you're talking about 2-hour and 5-minute marathoners on the left, and here you're talking about 8-hour marathoners on the right. And you can see the faster you are, presumably a good surrogate for the intensity and duration of training, obviously controlling for age here, the faster you are, presumably you've trained more, you train harder, you train more kilometers, your mortality goes down. Same for women, and women not only have this consistent, continuous benefit, the more fit they are, the more trained they are, the lower the mortality, but not surprisingly, because we know this from many other studies, they have a much, much lower cardiovascular mortality than men. For atrial fibrillation, by the way, we don't have time to go into that in great detail. Women are completely protected from the potential increase in atrial fibrillation rates that men are prone to. It is true when what your patients are reading that when somebody says, yes, doc, but what if I go out and run a marathon and I drop dead during the race? It's absolutely correct that exercise, especially competitive exercise, transiently increases your risk of sudden death. And that's because of the high sympathetic load and catecholamine load and high cardiovascular load of vigorous exercise. The extent to which an exercise bout increases your risk of sudden death is highly dependent on how trained you are. If you're unfit and you go shovel snow, then during the act of shoveling snow, you're increasing your risk of an infarct or sudden death 100-fold. So I'm going to repeat that because it sounds crazy. If you are unfit and you have let's say, if you're sedentary and you have a 1% per year risk of myocardial infarction, you translate that to an hour of shoveling, it's some fraction of 1%. Your temporary risk of sudden death during shoveling is gone up by 100-fold if you're unfit. If you're very fit, your risk is now doubled. So yes, it's true that acute exercise increases your risk of sudden death, but the extent to which during exercise your risk is increased is dramatically attenuated in people who are regular exercisers. Let's move on now to cardiovascular fibrosis. This is a paper we just published in December 2020. This is from the Toronto Sports Cardiology Group, and we took a group of about 100 committed competitive athletes, average age 55, Most of them were runners, some of them were triathletes. They exercised on the average, trained on the average an hour a day, 6 days a week. This is pretty typical for what we call sub-elite, competitive, middle-aged athletes. And when we found that there about 20 or 25% of them had myocardial scarring, but when we looked at recreational athletes, individuals who exercised about 2 or 3 times a week for about 30 minutes. So these are not couch potatoes, but they're not competitive athletes. I'll just underline the bottom line of the observation from this paper we just published, which showed that basically the extent to which we observed myocardial fibrosis or scarring on cardiac resonance imaging was similar between EA is endurance exercisers and PA is non-committed recreational exercisers was about the same. So the notion that long-term endurance exercise causes myocardial damage, which will make you drop dead, is almost certainly incorrect, except for the very unlucky 1 person in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 that has an underlying cardiomyopathy. That's obviously a different thing. We're talking about people who are healthy here. I don't have time to go into a long song and dance about return to play, but perhaps we can talk about that in the question period. This is something that we think about a lot in exercise or sports cardiology, which is, I've mostly talked up to now about individuals who don't have any known heart disease. What about somebody who has heart disease, either congenital heart disease or acquired heart disease, myocardial infarction after a stent, after myocarditis with heart failure? Of course, not too many patients who are heart failure patients will be long-term endurance athletes, but you may see quite some number of patients who are endurance athletes and for bad luck, because they have inherit a tendency to high cholesterol, for example, will develop myocardial infarction or PCI. So what do we tell them about return to play? We don't have time to go into the details, but my own philosophy here is that every athlete is individual. We think about the following kinds of variables with respect to our prescription for returning to sport and potentially competitive sport. We think about the reversibility of the disease, about LV function, symptoms. We often do stress tests to look for abnormalities. Very importantly, in my practice, the athlete values and preferences are extraordinarily important. If an athlete understands the risks, I do not ever forbid athletes from competitive sport. I just counsel them on the potential risks, and you've heard about the potential benefits. And we talk about particular risks, not general risks, which include ischemic events, arrhythmias, and adverse cardiac remodeling. This is obviously a complicated topic. We can't do justice to it in one slide, but be happy to talk about it in the question period. And with that, I'll stop and answer any questions. Thank you very much for your attention. It's a great delight to talk Canada-wide to a group of individuals interested in sport.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul, for all the incredible data. Like that makes so much sense. It really, the graphics that you provided really provide a great visual that we can go ahead and provide some conversation points with our patients. So we do have some questions here. I'll read them off. It was my understanding that endurance training had more risk of concentric cardiac hypertrophy in comparison to non-endurance athletes. And how is that related to atrial fibrillation?
It's a great question. There was formerly a belief that purely aerobic training, where there's very little resistance component, running would be a prime example, caused mostly cardiac eccentric hypertrophy, whereas resistance training, examples would be cycling, swimming, rowing, and even most so weightlifting. That's a whole other topic about weightlifters. The more resistance component there is to sport, the more you tend to get ventricular hypertrophy. That's probably true. The belief that you get different kinds of hypertrophy is not necessarily true. That's sort of not well understood, but it probably doesn't matter with respect to health outcomes. What kind of sport is more likely to cause or be related to atrial fibrillation is completely unknown. I'll just put a plug in for one of the studies that we're actually doing 2 studies. One is amongst elite rowers with the help of Jane Thornton and many others in the rowing community. We've tried to contact every former Olympian or national level rower in Canada, and we're interested in the lifelong trajectory of atrial fibrillation in former elite rowers. And we're doing the exact same thing in marathon runners. Many of you, I hope, will hear from our group, the Toronto Sport Cardiology group, within the next 6 months. We're going to try to contact somewhere between 50 and 100,000 individuals, all of whom have finished at least 1 marathon. We're doing this with the help of marathon organizers around the country. We're looking at individuals over age 55, and we're going to ask our, and any of you want to contact me about this, I would be delighted to chat with you or correspond with you about it. Or we're interested in the relationship between type of exercise, volume of exercise, and intensity of exercise, and the incidence of atrial fibrillation in runners. The bottom line is, it is completely unknown which type of sport is more likely to promote atrial fibrillation. My own belief is that it's mostly related to intensity, regardless of the kind of sport that you do. So it's kind of a factor of intensity multiplied by duration, rather than which particular sport.
Take myself on mute. Rookie mistake. So there's another one. Is there any studies for the effects of longevity with non-endurance activities? So like
there is a little bit. There is a recent meta-analysis of team sports versus power sports versus endurance sports. And here they're looking at individuals that in their age sort of 20 to 40 were elite athletes in these various disciplines. We don't know anything about sort of people who do resistance sports in their 50s or 60s. But if you're an endurance athlete or a team sport athlete, much of which is obviously endurance type activities, mostly soccer, this is an international study, American football, basketball, their mortality benefit is just as good as the endurance athletes. Power athletes lose the mortality benefit. There's no mortality loss. In other words, ex-weightlifters, boxers, I think it was mostly weightlifters and boxers, and Olympic level throwers, so javelin, shot put, discus. So those athletes, when they get into their 60s and 70s, they lose on the average, they lose the mortality benefit that endurance athletes got, but we don't know, is it because the endurance athletes in their 20s and 30s continue recreational endurance sport at an older age, whereas weightlifters may not be lifting weights for recreation in their 50s or 60s, or whether they just don't stop doing sport. We don't really have that kind of detail.
Okay. Yeah, because there's a follow-up question with respect to, why there aren't studies in, other sports such as gymnastics and sprinters. And all.
Yeah, it's, part of, I'm just going to give you my sort of opinion. Part of the challenge is that sports cardiology has focused on elite 20 and 30 something olds, because let's face it, most of us in this business would love to work with the cream of the cream of physical fitness. We love to work with elite athletes because they're wonderful physical specimens and we admire them and we like to see what they do, and it's kind of interesting. So there are thousands of publications in the sports cardiology world on the various ins and outs of cardiac adaptation in individuals under the age of about 35 to 40. Our group is primarily interested, not because we don't like to work with young athletes, but we're more interested in this growing, enormously rapidly growing population of individuals who are now in their 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, who have either been lifelong athletes and now are running into some kind of symptoms from a cardiac standpoint, or individuals who decide at age 50 or 60, I'm now going to start endurance sport. And that's been under-investigated, largely because it's not easy to find these individuals. It requires a certain amount of time and effort and collaboration from the sport community.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, Nolan says, with respect to coronary artery calcification, how much of the increased amount of CAC being insignificant for mortality in athletes would be related to vascular remodeling or collateralization? And is it relevant at all?
It's a great question. I doubt that it's got much to do with collateralization. There's no question that physiological remodeling protects the heart from ischemic insult. That's part of the reason, I think, why somebody with a physiologically remodeled or athlete's heart is going to have a smaller infarct or less likely to have an infarct when they have ischemia than somebody who's sedentary. They also have less cardiac inflammation. But most of the benefit, I think, comes from the anatomical or histological nature of the plaque in athletes versus non-athletes. Obviously, we can't generalize because there are some athletes who have the bad luck of having common garden atherosclerosis. But the kind of coronary calcification that I showed you on that slide, which tends to occur in long-term endurance athletes, tends to be stable, highly calcified intramural plaques. So these are not the kind of atheroma that grow into the lumen, if you like. They're not ulcerated. They don't tend to accumulate platelet thrombi. They tend not to clog up and cause myocardial infarction. So these are stable plaques. We now know that most infarctions don't occur in a blood vessel that's sort of 90% blocked. Most infarctions occur in a blood vessel that's 20% blocked. And there's a lipid-rich lipid plaque that's in the interior of a coronary artery. And depending on the context, whether it's exercise or stress or bad luck, that plaque fractures, exposes the gruel. That's why atheroma in Greek is gruel, the porridge-like stuff that's in the artery. Sorry to ruin your dinner here. The porridge that's in the artery is now exposed, high cholesterol, lots of crystals, now exposed to the blood lumen. And of course, platelets come and attach themselves to this fractured plaque, and then you get a clot, then you get a myocardial infarct. So that scenario, which is the typical scenario for myocardial infarction, is less likely to happen with these stable calcified plaques.
Rich, you're on mute again.
God, I hate that mute button. So I think we're going to call it at this point. It's 10 o'clock here in Ontario. So there's still a bunch of questions that are in the Q&A, and we'll send that off to you, Dr. Dorian, and you can answer
absolutely
them.
If it's okay with the organizers, please distribute my email. I'd be delighted to engage in conversation with anybody on the line. If any of you are interested, there's a very small, if I may put a plug in, there's probably only 6 or 7 committed sports cardiologists in all of Canada. Lots of people like to see athletes, but people, the if you like, group of us that are really committed to sports cardiology is very, very small. And wherever you are in the country, I can put you in touch with one of these individuals in your community if you have need for somebody with a referral. And please be in touch with me. I'd be delighted to chat with any of you.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. And thanks so much to all of you for attending, for Ryan and Golden, and Paul for being amazing presenters. This is overwhelmingly informative, and hopefully this sets the tone for the rest of the